Hello and welcome to the Second Wind Academy podcast, the show all about career transition from the perspective of elite athletes. Now, today's guest is Erin Cafaro. She is a two-time Olympic gold medalist in rowing. At the 2008 Olympic Games, she was part of an extraordinary group of women that were the first US women's boat to win an Olympic gold over 2,000 meters and repeated the feat in 2012. Now, after the 2012 Games, she retired from competition to give back to the sport through coaching, specializing in supporting injured athletes return to play or transition away from sport. Currently, she's a clinical psychologist, doctoral intern at UCLA Semel Institute with a focus on neuropsychology and cognitive rehabilitation. So she continues to consult and learn from various performance communities, including athletes, military, first responders, and business professionals. Now, we catch up fresh from her internship at a concussion clinic. Now, it's fascinating for me personally as my boys increase their playing time in rugby. But look, it's a great conversation about her ongoing career navigation to find her lifestyle and career second wind. Erin, thank you for joining me on the show today. Really looking forward to our conversation on all that is your career transition.
Ryan, thank you so much for having me. I've been waiting for this conversation for a while, so glad we finally connected.
Yes, it is. It is good. And yeah, we have been waiting. It's been, I guess, a few weeks or months as we've sort of tried to piece together a time that works. And well, there's a lot that you're up to at the moment. And so for those who are tuning in to learn a bit more, can you just introduce yourself and tell us what are you up to nowadays?
I am happy to. So, my name is Erin Cafaro. I am up to these days. What am I up to? I am at the tail end of my graduate school career in psychology, and I am at an internship right now at UCLA Semel Institute, which is in psychiatry and neuroscience. And I am specializing in neuropsychology, which is just a fancy way of saying helping folks with brain injuries and brain diseases and helping them adapt and get back to meaningful activities.
Wow, I like the way you say it's a simple way of describing that. Even that in itself must be so complex and must be quite interesting in the people that you are meeting during this internship.
Totally. I mean, I feel like we're going to dig deeper into this, but I see so many through lines. Having a major injury or diagnosis that changes the way you think and feel is absolutely a major life transition, right? And I just feel like the more I get to sit with others, the more I get to study the brain, the more generous I am with myself, and the more in awe I am of like the intricate ways we adapt. And it's amazing the resilience of the human body, mind, and spirit. And I get the absolute privilege of seeing that every day.
Yeah. What do you mean by you're more generous with yourself?
I think that, to be sure, I neglected the thinking part of myself. I was so focused on my body and, spirit as an athlete. And so even from, a younger age, I did decently well in school, but it wasn't something that I really focused on or, put a lot of energy into. And so the more I allow myself to dig into that, the more I understand how there's really no such thing as like a single intelligence. And that everybody, I think my job is just finding everybody's, strengths and where they can really lean into, especially when they have an injury or disease. So I think seeing the strengths, the different how different people's strengths come out in different ways has allowed me to realize my strengths, in many different ways too.
Yeah. Yeah. Is, is that an element? Is it an area of study that you were always interested in? Do you think? Has it always been there, or was it something that came,
No, yeah. I
just
mean, I don't know if
through
it's hard.
sport?
It's hard to put. Actually, I feel like I'm talking around it because, like, yeah, I think I did have a insecurity with my intelligence and like how much I was going to be able to contribute to this community. I just thought of myself as like a body, and that was going to be my contribution of like inspiring people to move and in ways, to see how the wonderful things you can achieve together in a team. And so
Yes.
it really, as I think most, beautiful things started with the tragedy. Like my father was diagnosed with vascular dementia.
Yeah.
Um, I guess it was about
Right.
7 or 8 years ago. And I became his caregiver and
Hmm.
just became deeply curious about what was going on, what was going to be the progression, and how to really support him, continuing to live a fulfilling life, even though he was losing different capacities, being able to
Yeah.
communicate and talk and,
Mm.
verbally, being able to move. Like he was also an athlete. And so movement was a big part of his life. And so it really kind of put me in touch with these like existential anxieties as well. But I think it really drove me to be, I feel like it's just such a, um, meta thing to learn about the brain with your brain, and it intimidated me. But once I started digging in, I was like, this is it's like anything. It's like anything else. You just there's patterns. There's patterns, and
Yeah.
so and there are ways that the human brain is, I think, functions, very much like the
Yeah.
human body. So I guess it is part of the human body, but yeah. So
Yeah.
I just dug into it, and as it goes, like once you start taking that first step,
Mm.
you can keep walking that path and discover some
That's
you
right.
know, I discovered that I didn't matter if I was smart or not. I had an interest and a curiosity, which was way more of a jet fuel.
Yeah. I mean that so much to go through there. I mean, sorry to hear about the journey that you had to undertake with your father, but like you say, that going through that tragedy or through that trauma, often something beautiful can emerge. And you talking about that intimidation or feeling intimidated because you felt that you were brought to sound very meta, you were brought onto this planet to dedicate your body to awesome sport and inspire people through your physical attributes, left you intimidated that you couldn't do more than that. That was it. You didn't have the intellect to bring something else. And so it is wonderful that you're finding that actually you do have more to give than being an awesome Olympic athlete. And now you're able to explore that journey. I think that's great. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there, um, perhaps is a bit of this gender influence of like the imposter syndrome. I hear and see and feel that outwardly women kind of feel like they aren't going to do something or aren't going to be good enough until or continue to not feel like they're going to be able to measure up. But you know and I had hoped and heard from so many mentors of like, you just in winning an Olympic medal. I know we haven't gotten there yet, but yes, I won an Olympic medal, and I wasn't sure if that was really on purpose or earned. So I had to go back and earn another. But yeah, I think this
I love that.
insecurity can be a fuel for sure. Um, and but I think as we can get into it, I think it does underlie some other deeper processes that I just think yeah, while it can be good jet fuel, it doesn't on the back
Mhm.
end of it in these
Yeah,
transitional periods is really when it comes up and can kind of haunt you.
yeah, yeah. It's like insecurity can propel you. It can move you forward, but it's often not enough to reach the destination. You need a different fuel or something else to help take you that whole journey.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I actually think you can win gold medals. You can publish, papers and, win prizes based on insecurity. Um, I think where it really comes out is in those transitional periods because it's a greedy fuel. Like it has to be constantly has to have constant feedback of like you're okay. Okay, I just turned in a paper, or okay, I just had a decent practice, you're going to be okay. But when you don't have that constant feedback, I think that's when it really comes up.
Yeah, I mean, look, I know we mentioned there because I'm keen to capture a bit of your journey to this point because this conversation itself is fascinating and it really does well bring out everything as to why we're connected. You know, why we're talking about this whole career transition and the trauma that we go through. So I want to sort of go back a little bit to that beginning for you then in terms of when sport when sport had started, you know, how you grew up in sport essentially. You know, what was that like for you? Because I'm keen to unpick also that balance between sport and academic. So the simple question is, for you as you grew up, how important was sport and how did it occur in your life?
Yeah, I appreciate you. Yeah, kind of bringing it back to the beginning because I think that is perhaps what might make all of this make a little bit more sense. So, I grew up in a small farm town in California, and the most important things were football, American football, excuse me. So, like the gridiron football, and family. And we had community was a big thing, and faith. And so there was every Sunday everybody would be going to church of different denominations, but everybody was at church. And so it was a super conservative, close knit community. But there was, I think there was some women. There's definitely opportunities for women to play in sport, but it was definitely male focused. And, nobody was going to watch women's sports. Now everybody watches women's sports, but, I looked up to my brother, who was a football player, and my dad, who also was a football player. Um, and, not just for their athletic acumen, but just the way they held themselves. Um, they just had this, you know, stillness and body confidence that I think that I assumed came from, being able to know that they can put their body through hard things. And so my older brother was like my hero, and he also, I would just follow him around everywhere, and he let me play with he and his friends. I wasn't I was not an indoor kid. I always wanted to be outside. And so, most of the other girls my age were indoors and, playing, well, at least in my neighborhood, they were indoors and wanted to play indoors, but I wanted to be outside. And so I got to play with the boys. Yeah. And I think, um, thankfully there's so many more role models and opportunities for young girls to play with each other. But I also think it was very formative for me to play, with the boys. And as my brother said, he's like, I know you're smaller, I know you're a girl, but we're not going to change. If you're going to play with us, we're not going to change any of the rules for you. So I got roughed up, but it was like,
you got pushed around a bit, but it was fun.
yes, yeah. I mean, broken bones, it was, but I was just kind of like, I don't care. Like, I'll ride the bench, like, as long as you let me just like be on the team.
Mhm.
And he did,
Wonderful.
and everybody, these guys in the neighborhood just, allowed me to be part of the team too. And so that was really helpful because, I came, to even take one step backwards. I came from, in my early years, I was a dancer. So I got into a semi-professional company, doing classical ballet dancing, and it was a lovely discipline, and a very unhealthy way for a young girl to start out, with body image and, just a lot of there was some unhealthy dynamics. And so I really gravitated, again, I just felt a lot more freedom and, um, outdoors. And so I ended up, stopping, ballet and switching over to sport. Um, and so, yeah, I think, uh-huh,
And so,
keep going.
so whilst you grew up with your, I mean, so whilst you grew up with your, again, following your brother around and sort of moving away from ballet, what sports did you then get exposed to whilst
Yeah.
doing that?
Um, I don't know if they had this over where you were, but we had this in the 80s. I was Gen X millennial, elder millennial kid, but we had
Zen,
a
Zennial. You're in that
Zennial.
Zennial
Thank
phase,
you.
as it's called.
Okay. Yes.
Zennial. There we go. That's it.
Um, yeah. So roller hockey was like a really big thing. Like rollerblades were coming out, and like that was like really cool. I
Yeah.
mean, I feel like they're making a comeback.
Oh, I'm with you. They're still cool. They were always cool. Okay, they were always cool. I was never gifted
Yeah.
on rollerblades, but I'll say they're
Yeah.
cool.
So, I mean, yeah. So I was, we would set up, like these roller derby, courses on our street. We would play roller hockey. Would also play like home run derby. Just a lot of just um, ball and stick games. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like my first introduction to play. Like ballet
Yeah.
did not feel like play. This felt like play. Um, mhm.
Sounds like you needed a bit of a competitive edge to sort of flow through in order to get you going.
Oh, but I would say ballet was like classical ballet is probably one of the most competitive
Mm.
sports I've ever played. Like it is cutthroat.
Right. Okay.
It can be,
Yes.
it
Yes.
can be like
Yeah.
really
I suppose.
gnarly, but
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. I imagine. So yeah, I suppose I was thinking of the physical
oh
impact of others
yeah,
more than that
yeah,
side. But
yeah.
yes. Yeah. I suppose you're right. That context is right.
Yeah, yeah. And then, as I got into middle school and high school, I really gravitated towards basketball. I still love, that's my favorite sport. I still love, shooting around. Um, but I was a decent basketball player, not a great one. And I it was my senior year in high school. I just, I knew I wanted to be have sports still be a part of my life when I went off to college, and I was ready to again ride the bench. I didn't care what I was going to do. I just knew I wanted to be on a team when I went to college. And my dad actually found this article about one of the crosstown rivals in basketball. She got a full ride rowing scholarship, and so that piqued his interest because he was like, "Hey, like let's look into this sport so you can get a scholarship." And this was when, the work that the women and allies did with Title IX, which is a law that was enacted over here in the U.S. to have equal amount of equal opportunities for female to male actually it's education, but also athletic opportunities. So that really changed the game over here in the U.S. and it started to really kick in the 2000s
Yeah.
when I started college.
Right. Okay. So Title IX, as you said, brought about that equal opportunity in terms of resource spend and allocation for men and women at universities or in college through the US. And yeah, okay. So you managed to, I guess, use that, or I guess the act of that started to mean more opportunities appeared for you as an athlete.
Yeah, I think across the board, but especially with rowing. Like
Yeah.
rowing really took off because
Mm.
for big American football um, teams or universities with big American football teams, like they needed another sport that could balance out the big roster and the big expenditures. And rowing is not a cheap sport to start a team with. Like these boats
Yeah.
are super
Yeah.
expensive. While you have nine people to a boat, especially in the college level, there's probably 60, 70 women to a team. And so that really, a lot of the athletic directors were like, hey, we need to put more into these rowing teams so we
Do
can
you know,
spend more on our
it,
American football teams.
that's right. It may be gaming the system, but if everyone benefits, it's okay. If
Yeah.
you certainly see the benefit, then it can
Yeah.
work. Um, well. I mean, so had you? So great that your dad, had seen this opportunity, but to what extent? So how often had you been in a boat up until that point?
Um, Not at all. So again, like I was grew up in a place with very little water. Like
Yeah.
the water was used for like irrigating the farms. So it was like not rowable water around
Yeah.
me. But once and he knew how to push my buttons. He was like, "Oh,
Uh-huh.
this girl from cross town
Ah,
got a full
yeah.
scholarship." And I was like,
Hmm.
"Oh, she can do
Yeah.
it. I can do it." And funny enough, she
I
she
can do
made
it
it to
too.
the national team, and we're dear friends still. So yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Does she know how much you motivated her and changed, or how she motivated you and changed the trajectory of your career?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
She actually moved back to like our hometown. And we
Yeah.
still keep in touch when I go back there. I visit her.
Yeah.
But yeah, she actually was on the um, planted another seed for me. She was in the 2004 um, women's eight who won a silver medal in the
Mm.
Athens Olympics, which was
Yeah.
the first time that the women had won a medal over 2,000 meters in that boat. And so they just planted the seed to be like, oh, these US women can actually
Yeah.
play this European sport. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah. Mm. Wonderful. Yeah. So, I'm interesting then. So, while sport for you at this point, senior year, sport was important. You wanted to be on the team, bench, whatever it might be. Academically, whilst college was a path for you, how important how did you see yourself academically at that point?
I, I am curious to hear if this is how this might be similar or different to other guests that you've had on, and athletes that you've worked with, but it was it almost felt like a necessary evil. Like it was something that I knew was going to be good for me. It was like taking a vitamin. I was like, I know this is going to be good for me. It's just going to get stuck in my throat though. And like, it's just like, I'm going to do what I need to do in order to play.
Yeah.
And again, it was an anxiety for me. There's other, layers of, I think, other things that were happened early on in my educational um, career, or my early on in elementary school, that just made it hard for me to really, like, I didn't feel good spending a lot of time there.
Mm.
So it was like, I'm gonna go towards what does feel good, and it's being on a team and moving my body.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think movement is my first language. I think that's the way for every baby in development. But I really put a lot of my attention towards movement, and academics was like, a side gig.
Something you had to get, academics was something you had to get done. If anything, it wasn't for you as enjoyable and perhaps as successful as you were physically. So doing your sport brought you a lot more joy and a lot more perhaps
Mm-hmm.
success in that regard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like I was actually listening to some of your podcasts. I think it was a conversation you had with Taj um, Deshawn, Deshawn, and he was
Yeah.
talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like something you said about, like, when he transitioned into um, afterwards. I think he was like in sales. How it didn't
Yes.
feel
Yeah.
good to be like an individual contributor. Like he wanted to be
Mm.
on somewhere where he could kind of feel like there was a community contribution and be, yeah. And so I feel
Yes.
like, and I still struggle with this, to be very sure, in academia. Like I
Mm-hmm.
am in the thick of it. Like
Yeah.
UCLA is like one of the premier like research institutions, and I still feel
Yes.
like it it's hard because, like,
Mm.
being in academia is really, you know, it doesn't have to be. When done right, it is a team effort. It is interdisciplinary, but a lot of times it's about like how many individual contributions or how many papers can I get my name on, not, how can I lift everybody up around me. Um,
Yeah. And yes, perhaps, and it's sometimes a sort of timing or at least a feedback issue. So how how rapidly does it feel like you're feeling part of a team? So it's not necessarily looking back, but it's almost a daily sense of, yep, I'm part of a team and I'm contributing all the
mhm.
time. That's what I'm understanding from you. Is it becomes a
Yeah.
key aspect of what you were looking for.
Yes. Absolutely. And I do think I found a niche within this, crazy academic world that really fits, of like tying this into clinical work. Like, I get to be in a boat with, one other person every single day. And it's like, okay, we're going to figure this out. How are we going to get to, what's the best way to get to the finish line? And so I really get to have a
Yes.
teammate when I'm doing clinical work. And I absolutely love that.
And and so well that I guess problem solving and that impacts. So we kind of just got there in terms of your career with your the view on, hey, getting to college, doing that through rowing is going to be a great way to make this happen. So the academic route was less important, certainly in your mind at that
Mm-hmm.
time, and it was more, yeah, college that clearly is good for parents and others as well, but also continues a sort of athletic journey for you as well. So how, what was going through your mind, the view of saying, well, I leave basketball behind and go into rowing, or was there evidently an opportunity to do both?
Hmm. Yeah, interesting question. So, I mean, in the university system in the US, you usually end up specializing in one sport. There are absolutely like freaky athletes, I don't know if you've heard of like a Bo Jackson, who's like just good at, baseball and American football.
Well, he was exceptional.
Yeah,
Yeah, he
he's
was
pretty
quite
good.
exceptional. But
Yeah.
yeah. There are a couple. There are a few who have been on the show who have spoken about doing both sports and getting that and trying to balance the two. But as you're saying, typically you have to
Mm,
select one and move down that
yeah.
path.
And yeah.
So how was that for you then?
Um, it's something that I've learned about myself that I really enjoy. And I guess this also has helped me in this phase of my career as well. Like, uh, I like to go deep on one thing. Like, I prefer not to have multiple different, activities I'm doing. Like, multiple different books I'm reading. Like, I like to go real deep on one thing at a time. And it's so far uh, paid off, and it's been helpful. I mean, that's kind of like how I feel like I was able to get into rowing so quickly. From, yeah,
Mm.
again, not rowing in high school. Actually, once I signed to get on the team in college, I was like, I don't want to be the new kid on the block. So I ended up taking a couple strokes before I got to college. But still, like,
Yeah.
I went deep down the rabbit hole with rowing.
Mhm.
And I think that really helped. I had a very quick trajectory to get onto the national team. I had rowed for
Yeah.
3 years total before I got on the
Hmm.
national team. And I think it was about 4 or 5 years before I got onto the Olympic team. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, it was
Well, that is a
a quick
quick.
turnaround.
Well, I mean that's quick, and you speak there, and it's a trait we see in many athletes. You describe as going deep down the rabbit hole, that real focus on one thing. Others may say an obsessive focus or an ability to really, you know, just blink at everything out and just be like, yeah, this is me. This is where I'm going down the path. Would you say it comes down to how do you feel about me describing it that way?
Yes, I totally pick up what you're throwing down. It actually reminds me, and I think I mentioned this to you in one of our first conversations. Like, one of the books that really, um, actually, was one of the impetus for me to get into grad school and kind of study about like major life transitions. Is a book called Winning at All Costs. And they do a deep dive, like psychoanalytical dive into famous athletes. And one of the athletes was an Australian rugby player, Johnny Wilkinson. And they talk about his obsessional drive and what that might
Yeah.
have stemmed from, like early in his
Hmm.
childhood, other stressors, like and why, um, you know, granted, it is an absolute feature for successful athletes, like
Hmm. Yeah.
how is that adaptive? And yeah, I think, one, where
Yeah.
does it come from, and then two, how do you adapt that feature?
Yeah.
And so for me, yeah, I mean, like, I have a different story than Johnny Wilkinson, but not so different. Like, I had some
Hmm.
early you know, unfortunate childhood stressors that just made me want to. I was very hyper vigilant about doing things,
Hmm.
and not to the point of becoming obsessive, like as in a diagnosis, but like
Hmm.
I I had a high pain tolerance to do things repetitively,
Yeah.
because I just kind of like, I had this need, and lo and behold, rowing is very
Yeah.
repetitive, and
Yeah.
high
And very
needs high
painful.
pain tolerance. So it was
Yeah.
just kind of like, it was, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think, again, sometimes some tragedies can turn into something beautiful.
Hmm. Yes. Yeah. And like you say, that ability to refocus, that um, ability to focus, or that I should say, the ability to refocus, that healthy obsessive trait
Mm-hmm.
is important and can support you as an athlete. But then, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, being a researcher and going deep into research, it syncs, actually works. It fits really well because it allows you to say, well, I really need to know. I'll say everything or as much as
Yeah.
possible about this
Yeah.
subject to be able to report it back. And it's similar then in sport where we get this desire to be an expert, to feel like we've mastered something, and to do that, you tend to need to go deep to really focus your efforts on
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think this kind of brings up the interesting conversation about, you know, um, building is grit something you build and discipline something you build, or is it something that there's contextual factors that actually
it.
make
Hmm.
you um, that make you want to go back and go back. And it's not because I remember people being like, oh my gosh, you're so disciplined, like you know you I could never
Yeah.
you know practice as many times as you do. And I'm like, no, like it's almost like I can't stop.
Mm. Yeah. It's see, there becomes a point, and it's as much a question as a statement. But there comes a point where what as an elite athlete you will do as, oh well, this is just what I have to do anyway, or this is what I want
Mhm.
to do, right? Um, is natural, but your desire to do something so repetitively and to so intensely, just happens to be 10x that of the average, or somebody else, and that's what helps set you apart. That's what helps you to master it. So there's a good chunk of perhaps achieving what you achieved, or what one achieves as an elite athlete, is, yeah, it's just what I wanted to do. I didn't realize it was so much more than other people. And then it gets hard. Then there's something else that has to come on top of it.
Mhm.
But that first part, at least, is just, yeah, 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 I'll row myself until I black out, is perfectly normal.
Mhm.
Something like that.
Yeah, and I think this is the interesting question that I don't know if I can answer, but I'm trying to collect more information on with my research. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was actually cued by this study I read out of the UK called the Gold Medalist Project. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it was this team of researchers who did a beautiful job of like doing these very in-depth interviews on different levels of athletes. And this was right before 2012 Olympics in London. So of
London.
course
Yeah.
they're like, how do we make more gold medalists in
Absolutely.
London? So that did not escape me. But UK does a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful job of like understanding, investing in psychology in sport too,
Mm-hmm.
as a side note. But yeah, so I believe it was like Lou Hardy and his colleagues interviewed um, 30 different athletes, 15, which they said were, I think they called them elites. So folks that had made like national teams, had, been on played professional sport. And then 15 that they called super elites. And these were folks that were multiple medalists, and we're trying to figure out what was the defining differences, or are there any themes or patterns between somebody who's really freaking good and somebody who's really 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 freaking good,
Yeah.
and one of there was many pieces that came out of it. Again, a lot of the themes that we were already talking about, that there was this obsessional drive. There's perfectionism, higher traits of narcissism, if you will, because
Mm-hmm.
you have to concentrate sometimes and block
Yeah.
everything else out. And the other interesting finding was, I can't remember the stats off the top of my head, but it was something like 13 out of 15. So almost all 15 super elites had multiple childhood stressors. And I think it was like 3 out of 15 of the elites had childhood stressors.
Yeah.
And so I think they didn't really highlight this finding like as much, but other researchers like picked this up as like, does talent need trauma? And I think the debate is still very open, because it's like, what one person's stressor and trauma is will affect somebody else's nervous system completely different. But there is, to me, as I understand this, like there is an interesting correlation between surviving stressors, and most especially if you have like a safe support to help you, or like a good coach, or supportive parents to help you through it, that you would be better at dealing with the stressors and the ups and downs of a sporting career. So that pretty much that is kind of like how I conceptualize it. But I think where I'm doing I want to kind of continue on that research is, okay, so that makes you a high performer in these really highly stressful situations. But what does that look like on the back end? How are you just, as we call it in psychology, like sublimating? So are you just kind of, again, using that high octane fuel over and over again in this high stress environment? And does that have more wear and tear on your mental and physical health on the back end? That's kind of like my question, like how are retired athletes' well-being on the back end who've had these multiple stressors?
Yeah. And what's your hypothesis then of that?
So I think that, we're only human. We're all, yes, we are all very human. We are not, even if you are a sporting god, you are not immune to stressors. There are so many benefits to participating in sport, but that does not negate, that does not negate traumas and stressors. And so I think that folks who have had multiple stressors and have not processed them, or have not gotten support processing them with an expert other, whether that's like a pastor, a therapist, a good coach can perhaps maybe be that person. So if they haven't helped process these stressors, then it will have wear and tear on the back end of a sporting career.
Wow. I mean, that's powerful and wonderful to be studying that, and to be, even if chipping away even a small bit in understanding the impact of long-term of stressors on athletes, and the impact it has, or how that might play out on the back end. I think shining a light on that is absolutely wonderful, and hence why we're talking forever whilst we're discovering this, because it is certainly a passion of mine as well, to try and get that understanding. It does make me think, and I think one of the consistent threads across, I'll say every athlete, statistically valid or not, but every athlete who's come on here and spoken always talks about the value of having a strong support structure. So having someone in your corner, having family, friends, or loved ones to speak with, someone who they'll say kept me grounded, somebody who looked after me when I was having tough times, gave me the sofa to lay on when I hit rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Nearly everybody, if not everyone, has brought about the importance of a community or a support structure to help them with this transition.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like I think that is one of the biggest, as we call them, like protective factors, like of
Mm-hmm.
having better mental and physical health on the back end. I mean,
Yeah.
if you think about it, again, it's not going through this life. It's like you don't want to die without any scars. It's like, I think that's a Fight Club reference, but I'll just drop that one in.
It's yours now, Erin. It's yours. It's
But
yours.
seriously,
Yeah.
like, I mean, that's part of the human experience, to go to have immense
Mm-hmm.
joy, and then also to experience immense sadness. And you never wish tragedy upon on anyone, but it really is, how can you, it's not about avoiding tragedy, it's because that will just happen, but it's like, how can you get back into rhythm?
Mm-hmm.
And community is the
Yeah.
best way. You can borrow somebody else's rhythm. You can borrow, like their sofa bed. And I
Yeah.
just find, I find that
Yeah.
I found that so much in rowing. Like when there's days where I was just overtrained, overcooked, and it was like, I'm just going to
Yeah.
I just have to show up, and I'm going to lean on somebody else bringing the rhythm today. And I'm going to fall
Mm-hmm.
into their rhythm.
Yeah.
And I don't have to create it. I
Right.
just have to show up and be there. And that
Mm-hmm.
actually helps strengthen them in some ways, because then they can lead. And then other days,
Yeah.
maybe
Mm-hmm.
they can borrow my rhythm. But I think that's the beauty of
I do love that.
community.
Like, I'm using.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that it's quite powerful. That or the way you describe it, because I can see it in a boat. I can see 8 or 9 people in that boat. I can see the 8 rowing, and I can envisage one of them having an off training session and thinking, you know what, my brain isn't here, but the beat's going. I just got to keep to it until it stops, and tomorrow's going to be better. I'm going to get through this, and you get to rely on somebody.
Yes.
And let them carry you over the water. Yeah.
Yeah.
I see it.
Yeah. No, it's like, that was like one of the biggest reliefs that I realized in my training career, is that I did not have to be the best, especially every day. Like nor was I the fastest person on the team. All I had to do was be consistent, show up, and also make sure everybody around me was having a good day, or at least a better day. And so I put a lot more energy into making people around me fast. Of course, I had this kind of like obsessional way of like getting myself fast, but I was undersized and under physiology compared to my peers. And so I knew that if I could increase their rhythm, that my rhythm, we would all benefit.
Yes. Yeah. In that benefit, as you were just ending there, you would all benefit. It almost makes me change a little mantra that I had in my head, which is about bringing your best every day. There's almost there's a fine tune. It's almost saying, actually, the sentence is incomplete. It needs a bit more context. So it's not necessarily bring your or be the best every day, but it is set your standard, be consistent, and show up. And that perhaps is a definition of being your best every day, but it is setting that standard and being consistent and meeting that.
I love that.
There you go. You just gave me a brain.
I love that connection.
Just makes it a bit different.
Yeah,
makes it a bit different. Well, but on that, so I'm curious then about you. So as you then come into college, we talk about that. To the extent it was planned or not, that 5-year trajectory to get you into that Olympic team. But when you came into college and you got in that boat, joined the crew, what did you aspire to achieve?
I was on the prize, no doubt about it. I, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
again, as I kind
Yeah.
of referenced earlier, that seed was planted because of the women before me. Like nothing,
Mm-hmm.
I cannot emphasize enough that, you know, um, being great at, or for me, like being great at rowing and being great at sport was skill, but it was absolutely
Mm-hmm.
timing. It was timing because women before me fought hard for Title IX and
Mm-hmm.
gave me this opportunity. It was
Mm-hmm.
timing because the women on the national team before me um, trained their asses off and believed in themselves enough to like make the podium.
Mm-hmm.
And so that allowed me to have this focus to go after a gold medal with my teammates.
Yeah. Uh, and so, how did it feel when you achieved the gold medal?
Simple question, hard to answer. um, I,
Tell me more.
um, yeah, I am been evolving how I answer this because it to me like I just remember looking over at my teammates and seeing them jumping for joy and what it seemed like tears of joy, like it just overwhelmed with emotion, and I felt this. I was crying as well, and it but I also felt this shock but also this sense of loss, and I was like, what is this? This is
Mm.
not what I anticipated. I just won. Like, how can I feel loss
Yeah.
when I just, not I, we did what we set out to do. Um, yeah. And so that was a very curious feeling for me. I think, yeah, as I kind of reflect on it more now and again, understanding a little bit more about, um, you know human psyche and how we can
Mm.
feel multiple emotions. We try to condense it into one, but
Yeah.
like, yeah, I think there was joy in there, but I think
Yeah.
there was also a bit of grief because again, like I did not want those moments in the boat with my teammates to stop, because
Yeah.
standing on the
Wow.
podium felt like a finish line, like an ultimate finish line. I was like, nope, I'm not ready for that. So I went back for another.
Yeah. So, okay. So again, I'll ask that simple question then. So when you got the second one, how did you feel after that?
Um, Similar. I felt
Similar.
very similar. There was actually more of a relief. I mean, we were racing from. I mean, we were ahead the whole race, and I attribute that
Yeah.
to the front of the boat. They had wonderful front end drive. Um, I
Yes.
but I we were the underdogs. We were underdogs, and this was in 2008 in Beijing, because Romania had
Yeah.
won. I think it was 24 years. Had this like legacy of winning this event,
Mm.
and so it was like nobody's going to break
Yes.
this. So yeah, it still felt like the underdogs, even though we won world championships. It was like they would
Right.
just show up
Mm-hmm.
every 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but we did, and then it was kind of like we put we had these high expectations for ourselves to do it again, and so there was a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more of a
Yeah.
relief in 2012.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but I also felt um, this sense of like, yeah, that like I was kind of referencing right from the beginning when I went hard fast, but yeah, like it
Yeah.
was just like it was this. I needed another dose. Like it wasn't enough. Like I already
Mm-hmm.
felt Like
Yeah.
I didn't know how else to um, express myself. Honestly, express myself
Mm.
besides through sport. And I knew if well, there's two
Yeah.
things. I knew if I stopped, that would be really hard because it was like such, again, I felt like
Mm-hmm.
I was put on this earth to like kind of express myself through movement. But two, I was like,
Yeah.
I know I need to stop. And because lifetime is short and I need to figure out,
Mm.
can I speak another language? Can
Yes.
can I contribute to this
Well
world
said.
in a different way? So that's
Yeah.
been a journey.
Mm-hmm. So after, so on that journey, the starting point of that journey, at what point did you start to think, well, this is it. I'm not doing another cycle. I'm going to stop p- competing at this level.
Um, it was very clear to me on the podium, to be honest. Like I was like, I
Mm-hmm.
am I'm done. Like if this does not feel satisfying or satiating, then
Mm-hmm.
it's time to pass the baton. It's time to let somebody else have this
Yeah.
experience.
Right.
Um and yeah.
So what did you do when that sense came over? And I guess not in not the reflection part, but I'm interested in, like, you went, yeah, okay, this is done. What did you do next?
Um like in the moments afterwards or like after.
Yeah, well, I suppose in the moment, well, yeah, after the games and
Yeah.
you're coming home, and or you are, and it's like, okay, this is it, we're
Mhm.
done. And to give the context, because I think for many athletes, when we reflect, we can give a story and say, "So I did this, and it felt like that." It's like, but actually, what I really did was nothing. I just hid. I went missing for six
Mhm.
months. Or I didn't know what to do. I Googled, what do I do when I stop playing or stop training, and saw what that answer
Yes.
did.
Yeah.
Um, it's like so when you think back to that moment, what did you do?
I feel so much relief and validation even from hearing that because that is that is what I did. I went back home and I would go out and um, do motivational speaking or some gigs, but it was so hard, so hard to get out of bed.
Mm,
Um, and I
yeah.
remember Googling, like post Olympic. I don't even remember exactly what it was, but yeah, this was the era. I think this was the first games. There was a little bit of YouTube around, a little bit of social media, but like
Mm,
nobody was talking about the back end of the Olympics. Like nobody feels sorry for,
mm-hmm.
especially an athlete that just won a gold medal. It's like, what do you do? Like, why am I feeling so shitty?
Twice, yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
remember coming across, I believe it was after 2012, coming across a article by Amanda Beard, who was like a swimming phenom in the US. And she started, I think she
Mm-hmm.
was like, I don't know, one of like the 14, maybe 15-year olds that started, she like brought in this like
Mm,
little bear. I think it was like the 96 games that she went and she
mm,
would bring like this transitional object, like stuffed bear with her to out
yeah.
onto the starting blocks. And I was like, okay,
That's,
but that
yes.
was like, she talked about how difficult it was for her on the back end. Um, and it was like a
Mm,
blog, I think, when those were still a thing.
mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was the only thing I could find. And I was like, okay, so nobody
Mm-hmm.
else is experiencing this. So I better just hush up about it and figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to be sure,
What was the hardest thing for you at that time? You said it was hard getting up, doing the motivational, doing the circuit. What did you find hard?
um, everything. Like it felt like, and
Mm.
I can put words to it now, but um, we can label it as depression. But I think because it was like, yeah, I just, all I wanted to do
Hmm.
was sleep. I would maybe walk around a little bit during the day, go outside, but didn't want to talk to anybody. It was like a big withdrawal um,
Hmm.
from everybody around me. And
Yeah.
you know, I, as I understand it now, I think a better, yes, there is words for it. Like I saw you had Staceyana Stitz on your podcast. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
she did
Yeah.
her college thesis on like this post-Olympic syndrome, which I had actually never heard that.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's referred to as like post-Olympic depression. But as I understand it now,
Yeah.
from more of like a neuroscience perspective, it's sympathetic
Hmm.
saturation. Like your nervous system is
Hmm.
overloaded. You just potentiated,
Yeah.
and again, I think
Hmm.
the hopeful thing, and maybe it's not hopeful, but the hard thing
Mm.
is
Yeah.
that it doesn't matter what you achieve if you did not perform or if you performed your best. You just
Hmm.
potentiated, you're just on the
Mm.
stage, you're
Yeah.
getting all this, you've trained,
Yeah.
in the
Right.
darkness, if
Yeah.
you will, and then you're out here, you get this
Yeah.
full on, you know, um, hardcore, like, overstimulation from everything at the Olympics,
Yeah.
and then it's lights out again. And so, but I think
Yeah.
from the cumulative stressors of training, from the stressors of just
Hmm.
being performing at the Olympics, and perhaps from personal life stressors, those things kind of peak and you
Mm.
potentiate. And then, of course, your system's going to have to go into depression in order to recalibrate.
Yeah.
So,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I feel like I can tell I talk about it more like from a sciencey background because it was hard. Like it was so
Which
gnarly.
is yeah. 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 And listen, the perspective you bring and the vocabulary that you can now use to it is great because you said it earlier. It gives validation. People feel it, and it's like, am I the only one who feels this? Being on the show, sharing now is certainly helping a community of athletes and actually non-athletes recognize, hey, it's not just me. And hearing you now describe it in, I'm just going to say it in a sciencey way, makes it really cool. It gives it a yeah, it's all right. This actually happens. There are emotions flowing through the body at this point, or not emotions. I mean
Yeah.
adrenaline,
Mhm.
chemicals, that type
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah.
There's a chemical reaction actually taking place.
Totally. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. So 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 how did you get? So how did you get to where you are now then? So you went through that phase, or you're going through that phase, that gnarly phase. What steps did you take to move out of it to kind of get to where you are today?
Yes. Such an important question. And something that I hesitate to talk about because I took a windy road. And I think this is one of my hopes in figuring out a way to better support people to do it better than I did. Um, I, um, I think one of the smartest things I did was I sought mental health professional, just like an expert
Mm-hmm.
observer that could kind of like help me, just would listen, but also give me feedback from a
Yeah. Right.
objective standpoint, or as objective as they could be.
Yeah.
And that was very helpful. I think one of the mistakes I made was I wanted to be sure that they had a sports background because I was I was positive that if any psychologist like could would talk to me, they
Mm-hmm.
would pathologize me and be like, "What's wrong with you?" Like there's,
I
you're just
see. Yeah.
you were hyper focused on the going backwards in a boat. I don't know. I just had this
Hmm.
like this thought that
Yeah.
a regular psychologist could not understand what I was going through, and that was absolutely false.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
That's right.
yeah, yeah. I think one of the well, and to be sure, like it took some trying on. Like it took multiple different therapists to
Hmm.
really find a good fit um,
Yeah.
for for me and help me feel comfortable enough to really start exploring again these other insecurities I've been carrying along in my backpack
Yeah.
with me everywhere I went. And
Hmm.
so that I feel like that definitely influenced me getting into the clinical psychology world to learn how to um, be a better listener, be a better teammate, and guide with for somebody going through a really hard transition.
So, how do you get into clinical psychology? What was you talk about it being this winding
Mm-hmm.
road, which is great. Everyone loves there isn't. It's very rarely a linear
No.
path to,
Yeah.
to anything. To
Yeah.
be honest, I think only birds travel that way. So, you,
Yeah.
so for you then, traveling the more human winding
Yeah.
path, how do you get into it? Was that a right clinical psychology? Here I
No.
go.
No. Again, like we didn't really talk about feelings in my family. I don't know if that might resonate with any of your listeners, but it was like, all right, dust it off, kid. Like, get back out there. Which was again helpful
Hmm.
for me to fit in some of these competitive spaces, if you will. Um, but
Hmm.
there wasn't room for my emotional life growing up, and so the way I
Hmm.
metabolized it was through movement, and so
Yeah.
I did not want to see a psychologist. I did not want to do anything. I definitely didn't
No.
had no aspirations of training to be one. Um, but I think what was one of the like impetus, um, like liminal moments was when I was actually a coach. And I continued to
Right.
see athletes who would get chronically injured. That was kind of what I specialized in is athletes who, because I had a career, surprise, surprise, that I just pushed really hard and would be chronically injured, but figure out how to come back. And so I was working with a lot of athletes who were struggling, to get healthy again so they could get back to the team. And
Yeah.
I just saw so much of what other things they were struggling with, what was, perhaps leading to this obsessive need to compete. And, and again, we all have our soft spots and what they might be avoiding. Um, and, by continuing to compete rather than retire. And so in seeing these and seeing this in athletes that I was training and then also, mentoring some of my dearest friends and teammates, like I was like, I want to figure out how to help people, how to, be better support to people. Cause again, like that was I could hear myself talking to them like, I don't know what's going on. You got to figure this out. And before you come practice tomorrow. So show up to your full self, your best self tomorrow. Like, figure it out, kid.
Yeah.
And I was like, who is it? Like, that was how I would talk to myself. And it doesn't,
Yeah.
you know, surprise, it didn't work. Um, and
Yeah.
then,
But it also
yeah,
didn't resonate with you. It sounds like, even though you were saying this, because that's what coaches
yeah,
say, you were like, hold on, this isn't
it
quite
isn't
right.
quite
It
right.
didn't work on me. There's got to be another
No.
way.
And I think
Yeah.
because there were moments where these athletes would really risk, you know, um, being vulnerable with me and really
Hmm.
share Well, and to be sure, some of the people that I coached were some of my teammates before. So I had some context of
Mm-hmm.
knowing from as a friend, like knowing what they were going through and
Mm.
knowing what these buttons were and what their hot octane fuel was to be like, to,
Mm-hmm.
whether you think you're not good enough or you're doing
Mm-hmm.
it for
Yeah.
somebody who, had passed
Mm.
and, this was their dying wish. It was like, these are hot button things that absolutely can make you go fast and win gold medals and can be very dangerous and unfulfilling to
Mm.
continue to reinforce. And that was where I
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
hold on, like, I don't want to keep pushing, my athletes, my friends, people that I really admired. I I want to understand, yeah, why people
Mm.
are doing,
Do you know-
doing what they
Yeah.
do and how to help them
Yeah.
have a healthier way of being
That
involved in things that they love.
it takes a lot of courage from yourself to it takes a lot of courage in yourself to recognize there's a better way to drive or to motivate individuals, and using a high octane approach isn't necessarily the most healthy for them as a person. And it I get a sense that that helped you to think about what happens in the back end, to think about, okay, this is dangerous. You're seeing your friends, former teammates, your athletes burn out, um, either before they've achieved or after they've achieved. But like you said, it has that same impact on them emotionally and physically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that does take a lot of courage, I would say, for you to actually make that shift.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you
change.
for that. Yeah. I think that was one of the biggest things. The other one was I continued to stay in the human, I guess we could call it human performance business and, coaching,
Mm-hmm.
everyday athletes too. And I saw how dysregulated people would get when I was sick or like when I couldn't show up. So again, when they couldn't get that
Mm-hmm.
instant hit of feedback, like to be sure we were like
Mm.
we had ran a programming site and so it would sell programming, and so if the site went down, like people would flip out if they didn't have their structure, if they didn't have this. And
Mm.
so it just made me really question a lot. I'm like, is while I still believe in the beauty of sport, and obviously there's so much to back that, like movement and exercise is healthy, like
Mm.
is there a ceiling? Is there a threshold for it being healthy, and how some people use movement
Mm.
to avoid difficult feelings because it kind of numb it.
Yeah.
If you're really going hard, it kind of numbs you out, right?
Yes, it does. It does. Yeah. Yeah. I guess there's there's one of these things there in sport and high performance. Like like we said, is that the healthy side of the individual. There's doing things in a healthy way, which because as you said, as part of the work you're doing now, that athletes are still human. The athletes are still human. So after it all, after all of that, you have a human at the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And what's best then for that human,
Mm-hmm.
both mentally and physically, is this, I guess, is this a fine balance, and that each generation of sport is trying to figure out what that is as we continue to go faster and
Yeah,
further and all those types of things.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because I have so much admiration for the athletes, like the active athletes, um,
Mm.
and even a lot of the retired athletes who have been a lot more open about their journey.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, um, there's this kind of like phrase of like they don't hide the ladder, if you will, of like how they got there, right? And so
Yes.
they're actually
Yeah.
showing that, yeah, I am struggling, and that's normal. You can still do hard things
Mm.
if you're struggling too.
Yeah.
And I think that
Mm-hmm.
is such a
Yes.
powerful message. And yeah, I'll be interested how that influences the next generation of athletes because when I was growing up, it was like, nope, we only want the highlights.
Mm. That's right. That's it. So don't talk about that. Just keep
Yes.
going. Um, don't tell me. Just show me. Off you go.
Yes.
Off you go.
Yes.
And that's
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So look, I mean, in terms of where you are now, when you look back at your career and your transition, when you're now speaking with an athlete who's on their way up, someone who aspires to achieve what you achieved athletically, what advice or what guidance do you give them to help them in their back end or in that to find their second wind in life?
Yeah, I think the the number one thing is exactly what we were just talking about. Normalize that, like, if you're not feeling okay, that's okay. You just put your body, your heart, your soul through a big training session, a big training round, if you will. And so
Yeah.
to kind of what's really resonated with people that I've talked to recently is talk about it as far as like a training cycle, right? In order to get the most out of your training, you have to recover. And the recovery feels shitty sometimes, right? I always hated tapering because it was like when you could start feeling again. But with that, like, yes, after you ask a lot of your body, it's gonna need some time to recalibrate. And so in order to help kind of ease that calibration period, there's like, I've been framing it in a way that I borrow this from, there's a wonderful psychotherapist over here, Esther Perel. And she kind of would talk to her. She mentioned the way that she helps frame how to kind of like help recover through something is in, down, and out. And so in being the basics, athletes are usually really good at this. Like, to calibrate, you need to sleep, you need to eat well, you need some movement. And so these three things are like non-negotiables, right? Because if you don't kind of have that foundation, everything else is your body's gonna have a harder time recovering and recalibrating. The down is the harder part. This is like convincing somebody they need to stretch. Add stretching to their training program. It's like not the sexy part, but you gotta dig in and do some of this psychological emotional work. You gotta, and it doesn't have to be with a therapist. There's so many other wonderful ways to heal. But I have yet to meet an athlete that has not either had a personal period of personal stressors, time where they went through like some immense personal stressors, or a period where there was immense sports stressors. Or a combination of both, usually. How can you kind of process that? Again, some people are on it. Some people are doing that while they're actively competing, but some of it you just can't really bring up, or it's not going to come to the surface level while you're still competing. Figuring out how to like really allow yourself to process some of the pieces that you've been through and really, integrate your story.
Yeah.
And to be sure, this down part is part of like frame. This will really help you figure out what you might want to do next. But I think sometimes this part gets skipped over of like, let's build your CV before you can kind of like finish the story. I think, yes, getting a job is, especially for Olympic athletes, is absolutely necessary because you don't have those financial resources usually. But
Yeah.
In order to really figure out what you want to do next that's meaningful, you have to dig in and go down before
Yeah.
you build your CV.
Hmm.
And then out is something that you touched on in the very beginning, is just figure out how to still stay integrated in your community. And this is something that, again,
Mm.
I wish I did earlier. This is, I withdrew. I had, and I still have like wonderful, beautiful friends and family. But
Mm.
I was, not in a place to ask for help. And also give
Mm.
help, like just stay connected to your community. Even if it feels like it's not gonna, yeah, even if it feels like it's not gonna feel good, because again, you can borrow somebody else's rhythm. You can borrow somebody else's rhythm for a moment.
Mm.
So yeah, I think those are the things that have been resonating, and I think also the things that I wish I had done and heard from along my journey.
Mm. I mean, I have to say, by through this conversation and being on the show with me, you certainly are contributing back to community and the greater sporting society as well by sharing your story, bringing your perspective to well how it began, how you won Olympic medals, and certainly the challenges that you've had to transition and find your second wind as well. So I want to say a massive thanks for sharing your journey with me today. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
Ryan, this has been such a pleasure, and it's been so easy to share. And I am just so grateful for you for creating a platform like this, because again, um, I think knowing that you're not alone, and hearing other people's stories can
Mm.
help you kind of create yours and your next step. So thank you for your constant contribution to athletes on the back end, and seeing that there's still a lot of value in athletes even after sport.
Absolutely, Erin. Thank you.
Yeah.